Hey guys, okay, so we're on to reasoning in our Fallacy Detective. So we're gonna review all of our fallacies so far, and there are a lot of them. I review these with you each week because you're gonna see these on Blue Book. I want you to have a working knowledge of these fallacies, because as we go through debate the rest of your challenge, the other 5 years, you need to point out when someone is trying to make a point using a fallacy, and then that they can be called out on that. You can see that their logic is not strong enough to support, because if you have to use a fallacy in that, that means that your argument's not strong enough, and we want you to be able to identify that and point that out. So that's why I go through all of these each week, reviewing these with you, and you will see them on your Blue Book. So let's just kind of review these. Let's start with our first one, the red herring. The very first one that we did. That is an irrelevant point. Your opponent brings it up to avoid the question. Okay, it introduces an irrelevant point to avoid the question. Special pleading. This is an unjustified exception. Makes an exception to what they're doing because it's wrong. What they're doing is wrong, but they need to make an exception for them. That's special pleading. Ad hominem. It attacks their character, attacks their motive. Instead of disproving the actual argument, it goes personal. Okay, and you'll see this in politics as well. If they can't attack the argument itself, they can make a personal attack, and then it appeals to our emotions, and then we get tied up in that and we forget about the actual issue. So a lot of fallacies truly are that, guys. They're manipulating our emotions, especially when I talk about what we just did, what y'all did last week. In today's, when we get to that, you'll see how it's just a way to manipulate our emotions to their way of thinking. Okay, so that is ad hominem. Let's go to genetic fallacy. Condemning an argument from its origins, so where it started. So not disproving the actual argument itself. We're gonna disprove it or make it sound faulty from where it began, even though it could be valid. Who or by who began it. So maybe we did it that person has a problem with who began it, so then they will discount it automatically based on its origins. So that's genetic fallacy. Okay, the next one on my list is tu quoque. Remember, that's the you too. It dismisses someone's point on an issue because they themselves are inconsistent in that very thing. But that doesn't mean that that's not valid. Even though we can be guilty of something, we can still know it's wrong and bring it up. So that's the fallacy of tu quoque. Let's see. Faulty appeal to authority. Okay? Faulty appeal to authority is when we appeal to someone who has no special knowledge in the area that is being discussed. Not that they don't have an authority or are an expert in something else, but in the area that's being discussed. That's where it's faulty, because they're not an expert in this area. Appeal to the people. So this is claiming a viewpoint is correct because many people believe it. Well, because everybody believes this, therefore it must be true. And I personally think that's how evolution, because with many people, when you get in a discussion with evolution, they'll get to a stopping point of just go, oh, because that's the way it is. Because they've heard it so much, therefore they're giving legitimacy to it because they've heard it from so many people. They're accepting it as truth. And that is the fallacy of appeal to the people. Okay, straw man. It's changing or exaggerating an opponent's position to make it easier to refute. So if I can blow it up a little bit, I can make it easier to refute or to go against. All right, so let's go circular reasoning. All right, circular reasoning is when one restates the point of an argument just using different words. So I'm trying to show that my point's valid and true, and then I bring it in and it sounds like I have more evidence, but I'm just restating the same thing in different words. So that's that circle that you see. Okay, equivocation. Equivocation, changing the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument. Same word, but say a word has two different meanings, and then I use it again in a different, and it typically throws us off a little bit, but that's equivocation. Okay. Loaded question. So loaded question is when there are two questions in one, but one's hidden. So we make assumptions in that. So when there's two questions in one question, but one is hidden and assumptions are being made. Slippery slope. It assumes if we take one step, nothing will stop us from taking a series of other steps. So if this happens, then all of this is going to happen. So that's slippery slope. Part to whole. So it is what is true of the part must also be true of the whole thing together. And then its opposite, whole to part. What is true of the whole must be true of the part. And that is not necessarily in either way. In either way, it's not necessarily true. We can't accept both of those as truth without proof. All right, either or. Either or is when someone insists we must choose between only two things, okay? When in fact there are more alternatives. Now sometimes there are just only two things, and that's not a fallacy. But if they're trying to manipulate or maneuver you down a path, these are the two you have to choose. When there are actually three other options, that's where it becomes a fallacy of either or. Okay, generalization. So generalization takes a sample from a group of things. Our book used the class of things, and they use characteristics from that sample. It's saying something about everything in that class. Hasty generalization, and it's when it's based on too small of a sample, and it's not representative of that whole group in itself. Okay, so analogy is when we compare two items with each other, and it can be either strong or weak. Okay, if it's weak when we compare the items that are major, but the similarities are minor. So big items, but they only carry one or two similarities. That's a weak analogy. So it's not truly comparing them to each other. It's not strong enough. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. Okay? After this, therefore, because of this. It concludes, since A happened before B, A must have caused B. Okay, and there's a lot of ignorance in that, because some things can have no relation whatsoever, but just to assume that because this happened first, this caused this. Proof by lack of evidence. So it shifts the burden of proof onto the accused. And when the accuser actually, if someone accuses you of something, it is they have the burden of proof. They have to prove that you did that. You don't have to prove you didn't. So it just kind of shifts that. And that is a right that we have in this country is if you ever go to court or are accused of something legally, the prosecutor, that's the person that is bringing the allegation, and the defendant. It is not on the defendant to prove he didn't do it. The burden lies on the prosecution. They have to have a strong enough case to prove you did it. So the burden of proof lies on them. And I know shows kind of skew that a lot, but as a right as an American, the prosecution has to have strong enough proof to show that that defendant did what they're being accused of. Okay. All right, so that gets us into, hang on, I'm going to make a note on this. I see where I left something off our email. Okay, so that gets us into this week. This week is propaganda, okay, and this is truly appealing to emotions. And you will see, so if you've ever read much about wars, World War II especially, propaganda, Germans would drop these posters out of planes, not just Germany, several countries did it, but they were using it to appeal to the emotions of people. So the first one, first of all, let's define propaganda first. It's the strategy for spreading beliefs and ideas. Now, particular is when it's manipulative. So manipulative propaganda is when someone plays with our emotions, designing in a way that's designed to make us agree without thinking through the issue carefully. And when emotions get involved, we all know that we don't think clearly. They drive us many times. So appeal to fear. That's going to be the first one. I misspelled that. Sorry. When someone appeals to fear, it is a propaganda technique that is used to have you fear the consequences if you don't do what they want. Okay? They have, let me go back in our book and I can read you the example that I'm wanting to point out. Okay, so manipulative propaganda is like the red herring fallacy. It avoids the important issues that should be addressed to distract us using our emotions. When we think we are being manipulated by propaganda, it is useful to ask ourselves, is this person actually proving what he is saying, or is he merely giving me the impression that he has proven it to me? Is what he's saying relevant? All right, so they actually bring the Bible verse, John 7:24, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Because we want to be people that make better decisions. We think through things and they help us to make a better decision. And when someone plays on our emotions, it definitely happens. And appeal to fear is one of those, that we fear the consequences if we don't. So we typically tend to act irrationally. Sorry, not rationally. Okay, and then the next one is appeal to pity. It makes us do something out of pity for someone. All right? Actually, let me go back. I want to go to appeal to fear because this is the example. So in lesson 30, it says, it's the prosecuting attorney. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I urge you to convict John Jones of this crime of murder. We need to put him where he can never commit any more crimes. Okay, so he's stating what he wants. And then he uses this, appeal to fear. If you don't convict him, you may be his next victim. Okay, so right there, appeal to fear of the consequence. If you don't, this could be what happened. All right, now, not an appeal to fear. This happens when someone threatens us, but they're not trying to change our opinion, and they use a bank robber. If you don't transfer all the money into my account, I will give you a bad case of lead poisoning with this gun. Okay, so he's not trying to change our mind. He's telling us what our options are. So that's not a fallacy, not appeal to fear fallacy or a type of propaganda. It's actually telling you the options. So I thought that was interesting.